Welcome to Everyday Courage. This is a podcast that for people who both like podcasts and hate podcasts about courage as it shows up in our everyday lives in small and big ways, in ways that we may not actually expect or maybe not even think of as courageous. And this is kind of an experiment. It's a way to find out if we can learn something about courage writ larger in this moment of great social and political tensions. This is our very first episode. The first episode we are recording. So it is our first pancake. It's going to be, it might be lumpy and messy.
So we may have some technical difficulties, basically.
And please let me introduce my co-host, Stephan Dweck. Stephan is an entertainment lawyer in New York City, and I'll let him tell you what else he does.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No,
Steph and I have known one another since the late 90s.
Yeah.
When he cast me in a film for a role named David Millstone that I wasn't good enough an actor to play, so I never got the part. And our guest today...
He didn't get his own part. That was modeled on him, Joe.
Yeah, I suck. Our guest today is former Rabbi Joey Wolf. Rabbi Joey was rabbi at Havurah Shalom, which is where I know him from, in Portland, Oregon for, drum roll please, 30 years.
Oh, congratulations.
Hey, Joey.
Thank you. I got a doctorate of endurance a while back. So, I mean, I'm proud of that.
I invited Joey on for our first episode because the man, when I was a member of the synagogue out in Portland for a few years. My only really time in synagogue life. I never gone before, never gone after. But Joey was able to speak with common sense and from the heart, and often with scholarship, though we're not necessarily about scholarship here, about matters that are important to us we don't always give a lot of thought to. So you want to tell us anything about your background, Joey?
Well, since this is a podcast about courage, I guess what's important for me to say is that I think if any, and I'm reluctant to speak about courage. I'll put that out first of all because I'm not so sure I'm the most courageous person. But I think it took some courage for me to decide to become a spiritual leader or a rabbi in this period of time, in the latter part of the 20th century and into the 21st century. People speak about now rabbis becoming ordained and taking leadership now is tough enough. In that period, it was at a particular time when institutional religion was just completely falling down. I mean, it was just changing remarkably. And I just never wanted to do that. It wasn't my idea. I was just a student, and I was trying to be true to Jewish tradition. So I say a student, I was studying sacred texts and trying to convey the deep meaning in them. And I think that speaks to the issue of courage, because courage, at least in Hebrew, is ometz lev. There's no one single word for courage in Hebrew. It has to do with the heart.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to do where your heart goes. And it has to do with ometz lev means charging the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Making what you really feel and what you know work. That's how I got into this.
I like that a lot. I like that a lot.
Well, so you're happy with your choice?
Well, yeah, I am. I'm happy, but I'm also surprised. If I look back, I say, wait, how did I do that? And the reason is I remember what it was like to begin to do it, and I was terrified. So in terms of speaking about courage, I can still remember the very first day that I was a rabbi on the job. It happened to be in Austin, Texas. I was there for about 5 years. And I was saying to myself throughout the day, I was sweating in a suit in about 98-degree weather. And I was thinking,
in Austin,
yeah. I said, well, what am I doing? What am I doing? I can't do this. I don't do this. Whatever this was, I couldn't imagine staying with it. You mentioned 30 years. At that point, it was probably about 30, it would be 37 or 38 years later. So it was unimaginable to me. But as it turns out, yes, I'm very happy. I'm thrilled that I've been able to work with great people and really do some good stuff.
Before you go on, Dave, what was it? You said you were really scared. What was it that allowed you to power through that, to get past that fear? Because I think we all have that in a lot of areas, but you powered through it. How did you do that?
Well, you're right. I should say you're absolutely right. You're always powering through fear. You have to confront fear and learn from it. That's the pathway to being courageous for anybody, for anybody. What allowed me to do it was simply to recognize that I was always playing that role growing up. I was always trying to stand somewhere in the middle and convey to my friends, who were mostly Jews, although there were a couple of Irish Catholic folks around me too, whoever wanted to know, what did it mean to be involved in spiritual, learning? What did that mean? What did it mean to be connected to this tradition? So that's what I was doing. I was always doing that. It was always hearing that sort of internal note. And that gave me the courage to continue doing it. That's what I was doing. I wasn't trying to play a role.
Right. So you always had that confidence, that inner confidence that this was where you needed to be.
Inner knowledge that was really significant, moving, powerful, truthful.
So what I'm hearing, because I remember you were kind enough to fill out a questionnaire for us before we aired, and you spoke of courage as, well, I heard, because I've done some lots of hovel on stage, I heard living in truth. So it sounds as if, to my ear, you're saying that you've always been attuned to something truthful or grounded in yourself.
Yes. Now, every one of us is growing up in a context. So if you're growing up in middle-class America, or if you're growing up in a suburb, or if you're growing up in the city, wherever you're growing up, to be attuned is not a simple thing.
Mm.
So you have to cut out noise in order to be attuned. There were lots of messages I was getting. There were lots of messages. Actually, I thought about this earlier in the day as I was just thinking a bit about this conversation. There are other voices that had to do with what I'd call more superficial and actually toxic ideas of courage. What did it mean to grow up, boy, in a culture where boys are always, getting into it with each other physically and brutally. What are those messages about? And I put myself in certain situations that were, I'd say they're laughable in retrospect, thank God. I mean, they were not nice situations where people were showing, young men were showing how to be courageous. And I didn't belong there. I really didn't belong in the middle of these situations. So I had to say to myself, wait a minute, what am I doing? And that represented some kind of a conflict as well.
How did you hear that? How were you able to listen to that internal voice rather than become overly seduced or overly anxious about appeasing those more external voices?
So there was a measure of shame involved. And when I say shame, I think at some point, we have to figure out how our conduct measures up to the longer term voices that we hear. There's this tradition within Judaism of the shofar blast, the ram's horn. It blows this long, long, long sound that lasts forever. Well, that sound was being blasted through my system. That's my heart. I'm hearing this deep inside of me. And here I'd be in the middle of, like they called it one day in the town outside of Boston where I grew up, I was in the middle of a rumble. But I wasn't just in the middle of the rumble. I was at the face of the rumble. Now, I didn't belong there. How did I get into this mess?
How'd you get there?
Because I was listening to all the wrong messages of my friends who were like, everybody's marching out against a bunch of other guys. All I can tell you is the shame involved in that. Thinking, this is not what I know certainly from my family. My family, my family did not have clear-cut messages for me, but let's just say I heard longer notes. Maybe it came from my grandmother or it came from further back. I'm convinced that my spirituality is inherited. It's generational, intergenerational. I really think that I listened to certain messages that go back a couple of generations.
That sound, dude, that actually that resonates with me, and I bet you it does with Stephan as well. We all carry these histories, often filled with traumas. They get passed down generation to generation, implicitly, culturally and through habits and through the inability as well as ability to communicate well. I got a question. I'm sorry, Stephan, you go.
He transcended those traumas. And sometimes you have to do that. You have to transcend the community. And I just don't mean physically, but the family community, those voices you spoke about, the toxicity, to really be true to that inner voice. Go ahead.
Right. I mean, all right, so we all have family traumas. We all have hurdles. We all have, barriers that we have to jump over in order to really get a clearer picture, hear that voice. I certainly did, but there are also photographs on the wall of my house of people, and I know there's stories. And more recently, in the last 10 years, I've read and discovered their history and know more about these people. And I know where they come from, and I know what was involved in my spiritual heritage. I know the kind of people they were, bringing, a real sense of humanitarian caring and hopes about society and the world with them. These were things that were, I think, subliminally passed on to me. And now I'm going to tell you, there's a bit of a wonder or a miracle for me, and that is that while growing up in just a middle class male American 1950s 1960s environment, somehow or other I was managing to learn Hebrew and to care about ancient texts while feigning as if I was totally rejecting this stuff and becoming an American male. Somehow or other, I was holding on to this stuff. It was very, very important to me, extremely significant. And I didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah, but you did. I have a question for you. This is partly coming out of the fact that this is our very first podcast. When I told you that this podcast was called Everyday Courage, what did you think? What did you think it was about, and how did that resonate?
So, I was worried because, like I say, I'm going back to, like I said originally, hey, I'm not courageous. Who, me? I thought about two things. First of all, what is it in Hebrew and what does it mean to be courageous in terms of Jewish thinking? And as I said earlier, it's about checking in with your heart, which is your mind, your awareness of truths, and staying with those truths. And then I thought, well, okay, what about my work? What about my work has been courageous? David, there were times, I suppose you saw that I stood up for certain things, but hey, okay, standing up for those things. There were people all around us who were career radicals.
But one of the things that continually surprises me in the world is how people do not sort of stand up, and how people are, apparently lack courage for all kinds of rationalizations. I'm thinking right now of contemporary GOP leadership more than anybody else. Why is it you think, there are 100 answers to this possibly, that people are able to lose touch with that thing in themselves that is encouraging, that you never were able to lose touch with.
I don't think you should say I never lose touch. I mean, that's
Fair.
I mean, I can't accept that as a description of me. Yes, I think we all lose touch. I'll tell you, that's how fascism came about in the world. We know that people didn't see the signs. They didn't read the signs. And it's very important to understand where the signs are, how they operate in our lives, and to understand that we each play a role, and that we each can say something or do something wherever we are. One of the tiny things that I do is I write. Okay, and so I have a blog, and it's seen by a lot of people. Okay, and I've been writing pretty much about what's going on around us. That's something that I can do. Other people can do other things. They can get out in a square and speak eloquently in front of thousands of people. That's a great thing. But that's not the only thing they can do. All right, lawyers can say to their law firm, I'm not going to be a part of conceding to the authoritarianism right now in America. I will not do that. But everybody has to read the signs and understand that at some point they're going to have to draw a line. They're going to have to make some people unhappy, and they're going to have to take a risk. And I think we all can do that. We can all fail to do that. But I think the lesson is that fascism doesn't happen swiftly in the sense that it's not overnight. Oh, I woke up this morning and our government has turned fascist. It happens in subtle ways. And we think that what we're seeing is quite remarkable and justifiably so. But in terms of its impact on many of us, most of us, it's subtle. You know, we're not being rounded up or detained, you know, most of us.
Yeah. What, Joey, in your opinion, what are those signs today?
Well, I think for different people, it's each one of us has to say, okay, I'm being asked to contribute to something. And should I make a contribution? By the way, contribution is monetary, but contribution is time. We know people here, and David, you would understand in the Havurah here, that have taken people in, who've, you know, rescued people, immigrant families. They're incredibly generous people. But you say, how do you read the signs? Well, you have to know when you're watching the news. By the way, when I said watching the news, notice I said when you're reading, right? I'm not advising that people watch television to get the news or listen to the influencers, all right? But when you're reading, you have to pay careful attention. But, you know, when an American president is given a jet as just, you know, a wonderful, wonderful token, you know, of pleasure and, you know, gracious hospitality, you have to say to yourself, what's going on? Or when you see that Harvard today, they were taking away more money, more grants, you know, well, that's research grants. I mean, what's going on? And people have to stand up, but everybody has to do it where they can. I can't do anything about Harvard, you know?
Right.
Each one of us in our own arena, we need to figure out where that is.
One of my favorite TV shows right now is Andor, the sci-fi show. It's a Star Wars thing, but it's an adult. It's one of the more adult versions of it. And the show, the theme of the show is about the little tiny acts of truth telling and living in truth and acts of resistance. I have a question. An idea popped up in my head earlier today. I don't know how useful it is. Nothing on.
Did you order a pizza, David?
There's nothing on my end. So, something a way of putting this earlier occurred to me. I don't know how useful it is, but suddenly the thought of courage as a habit came to me. I was thinking of different kinds of courage. I'll get to meanings of courage, but then suddenly it occurred to me, wait a minute, is courage, you know, not only something that we learn, but is it a habit that individually and collectively we can fall into or out of? And I was thinking about social media, and, you know, I thought in the aughts that social media was going to be this great, you know, coming together. turns out to be the great splinterer. It put us into smaller and smaller bubbles. And also just living in a capitalist world, late stage capitalism, living at this moment as we're, increasingly, unless you're the poorest of the poor, you're really very comfortable. We have big TVs and comfortable homes, and we can retreat into our private lives more easily than ever. Do you think there's something to this thought that courage is a habit, and can we train ourselves back into it?
Yeah. All right. So it is a Jewish approach, by the way. I can only answer in terms of what I know, what I've thought about, what I've studied. And there's this idea in Judaism. There's this whole train of thought called Musar. In Hebrew, conventional modern Hebrew, it's Musar, but it's Musar. And Musar came out of Lithuanian Jewish thinking in the very beginning, at least, and it was connected with the more mystical way of approaching important ideas and truths. Musar is about training yourself, in fact, to cultivate habits that focus on your qualities. We all have qualities. In Hebrew, they're called midas, midot. So we all have qualities that we can recognize are really important. And yet we know that those qualities are often masked or repressed, and we don't spend enough time working on them. Okay. Now I'm just going to give you a social example of that. You may or may not know, you may recall, it's always been important in my household to welcome people for Shabbat, to welcome people for dinner, to have people over. Now, somewhere along the line, it was a quality that I thought I needed to cultivate to set a table and welcome people in, but not only that, to cook up a beautiful and aesthetic, welcoming place for people. That was extremely important. And by the way, I learned more about hospitality as well. We got a lot of help from a great, great, great Christian thinker, Henry Nouwen, or Henri Nouwen, who taught fabulous lessons about hospitality. That is to say, the obligations upon the host and the obligations of a guest. Guests have obligations as well. What does it mean to be a good guest? Well, how do you offer to help set a table? What do you do to share in the opportunity to sit down with one another? But I guess what I'm getting back to saying is that you're absolutely right. We need to train ourselves toward good habits. On another level, if we have a tendency to anger, if we to become angry or to say negative things to people, we have to develop habits to look at those interactions and to figure out how to stop them on the way. And some of us get better at that. Some of us need years of therapy and still don't get better. But these are opportunities to think about what we could do habitually to train ourselves to contribute differently to the world around us.
Yeah. So one of the sticking points in my life can actually be my anger. You know some things about me, and I have some deep-seated, stuff that I've massaged through the years, and it remains a challenge. Is there anything in your life you're willing or happy to talk about that remains kind of a sticking point that you find yourself working through to find more courage?
All the time. I mean, I don't understand how people can talk about, like, okay, I've reached this stage where now I want to share. I want to radiate. I mean, I want to radiate my sainthood. I mean, that just doesn't happen for me. I'm just a regular human being, okay? And I identify with everyday human beings. It's just that, so I meditate. So one of the things I want to do is to stop. Is to stop and to listen to my heart. By the way, the heart is a metaphorical way, at least in Jewish terms, of talking about mindfulness. That's all it is. It's, we have this gift. It's called consciousness. But most of the time we're unconscious. And that's the weird thing.
Do you find more time for this part of your journey now since you retired, or has it always been there?
Good question.
So I've shifted, let's just say, where I put my energy. People ask this ridiculous question of retired people, especially when they've just retired. They always say, like, what are you doing? They look at you with googly eyes. What are you doing? A woman came up to me just only recently, only a couple of months ago, and said that in all earnestness. And of course, I had a joke right on the spot for her that really threw her, because she was still totally mystified that I was standing there. This is if I reached retirement, and what are you doing? And it's not what you're doing. It's if you haven't confronted all along who you are, what you're being, then you're gonna have a tough time with retirement. So the minute I got into retirement, well, I was just gonna be more. So what does it mean, and what does it mean in terms of courage? Okay, I wanted to write more. You want to act, or you've been involved in theater, which to me is holy stuff. Okay, all right. Holy stuff for me is writing, and holy stuff for me, oh, by the way, is listening to music, going to hear classical, to hear chamber music, or to hear jazz trio. I've met recently a wonderful jazz bassist in town who's 90 years old, an extraordinary individual. Music to me is a spectacular thing. I love to look at art. I love to go to a museum or a gallery. These are all things I've always loved, only now I'm really thoroughly enjoying them. And I've learned another language,
So how's the writing been going? So I know you finished a novel. So tell me about that's why I asked. That's why I asked, because I knew you were going to get this humble So you're looking everywhere.
Yeah.
So that's
the novel.
Here comes the book.
Yes, it's a great book. I recommend it.
Yes.
Everybody should read this book. I've written the book probably about 7 times. I was just told recently by a really, truly great and published poet. He's written a novel, but he's really a great poet.
Is this Kim?
Sorry?
Is this Kim we're talking about? Stafford?
No.
Oh, okay. Pop.
But he is he's a published poet in the New Yorker, and you can find it. I'm not going to say his name here, but
of course, sorry. Cut that out, Michelle.
Because, well, I'll tell you what he asked me about my novel, and we're sitting and talking, and he says, how many words? And I told him how many words. He said, okay, cut it down by a half.
Yeah.
In other words, after writing it 6 or 7 times, there was plenty more work to do. All right, but the process of writing that novel is utterly spiritual to me. It's the most powerful work. Not only get words on a page, which is, like any art form, is hard to do, but also, to stay with your ideas, to stay with your way of producing something that's really beautiful and that has a form to it. Mm-hmm. Form is very important in all David, of this discussion.
Yes.
When do you feel, Tony, as a writer now, Joey, when do you say it's ready, it's good, I want other eyes to look at it? When does that happen?
I've said it a couple of times, and each time I pulled it back. But it wasn't out of my lack of. In fact, this isn't a lack of courage.
Courage, exactly.
This was a lack of wisdom. Okay, so my wife said, "Don't you think you ought to rewrite it again?" Or something to that effect. Or the poet said, cut it by this many words. Well, I've had to look at it and say, it's not ready yet. It's not ready for prime time. By the way, I absolutely intend to get this right. And will. Which is, by the way, totally amazing because I didn't know I could do that. Okay, that's one of the things when I retired, I always thought I really wanted to do, but I was shocked. And I think this is an important point. I'll say that I'm shocked when I find that I could do something that I didn't really trust at first.
That's courage.
I could do. Is it after the fact courage? I don't know where. I mean, let's just say you get what I'm saying. It might be in retrospect. Oh my God, I was courageous. But going forward, it's more like staying with something, and it's pretty amazing.
I have another question. I have a question, going to jump tracks just a tiny bit. In a way, you have been fortunate to be spoiled to be in such a wonderful community as Havara Shalom. That community, I saw an awful lot of just this wonderful kind of, I'm going to call it public intimacy, where people were able to bring themselves in all kinds of ways. And it was a community that I saw, courage being transmitted from one person to another. And I often feel that for someone secular such as myself, secular in a way that many of us are, we've really lost something as formal religion has kind of backed out of our lives. I'm wondering, what institution, what like religion or religion itself can help us come back together as communities through which we can encourage one another. I'm sorry that was a mess, but
I get what you're saying. I mean, I will say this. I totally agree. I mean, I always say I was the luckiest guy in the world to end up here. Okay, this was an extraordinary group of people, an extraordinary time. It was an extraordinary phase of the development of the group. By the way, David, it's 550 households. Mm-hmm. So it can't do what it used to do. Mm-hmm. It does other things. Mm-hmm. And, there are other issues vis-a-vis size, and it's a different animal, but it's still, it's still pretty remarkable. I consider myself very lucky because I could operate. It's sort of like where can you discover an incubator, we'll say,
nice,
of action and refined thinking and process. I think people write about that, and I think people do have these opportunities. I mean, writers have these writers' workshops. They have friends. They have communities where they work things through. There are cooperatives, farming cooperatives, where people are, invested with each other. There are artists' communities. I think you're right. Most people don't have that, and that's what's ailing, American society. We're lost in this society. People don't have a sense of connectedness, and certainly not tradition, whatever the tradition is. So people look for other ways to bond and to connect. They do it. They think that, interactivity on on social media is another way to get at it. We all know that that's more hazardous than anything else. So it's a problem. It's a problem. I mean, there are a lot of places where people bond, all the way to the cultish places. Right. But certainly there are mega churches, right? Mm-hmm. There are all kinds of institutions that people belong to. But you want to get to a place where people are hopefully sharing ideas, thinking things through with each other. Carefully, they're learning to listen to each other. That's very important, to humbly listen.
I remember back in the day when you and I knew each other. When you and I knew each other.
That's me.
That's you. That's right. That's Miami Beach. When we talked some about the issues of modernity, and we were, when we were visiting Israel, we were talking about issues of nationalism and ethnic nationalism, as organizing principle, and we're right there. Yeah, that was in the early aughts, I guess.
Were you on a trip with me?
Yeah, I was. Yeah. Why?
Don't
worry about it. That's right.
Was that Well, I mean, it depends when, because it was
It was around 2002 or three, just after the second
You didn't
Intifada.
invite me,
Yeah, it was. But anyway,
David.
I get the sense. I just had the sense from your brief some description of the novel you just wrote that you're kind of getting. You're trying to get to some of those, some of the germinating moments of early modernism, but where we are now.
I am.
Tell us about that a little bit.
Well, in my novel, it's essentially about a character who lives a little bit after this period of time. And so, if anything, everything that's absolutely plaguing society has only intensified. Things are going just flipping over. So it's exponentially crazy. But he's because of certain patents that he's onto. He's in advertising. He has the ability to get a hold of a memory drug. Okay, so he goes back in time, but he only goes back in time accidentally, but discovers, essentially his ancestry at the beginning of the 20th century. That's about as far back as he's going. But in discovering that ancestry and becoming a person who is actually a real person, and truthfully, a historical person, he's situated at a time where, yes, he's experiencing some of the incredibly difficult conflicts that have just blossomed all around us. Everything from being in a very, very parochial Jewish world to looking, hopefully, exquisitely hopefully, to a communist world where people are sharing, people are creating a society that's international and hopeful, and he's running around Europe and he's meeting artists, and he's a journalist in that society, but he's representing this great hope about merging.
I'm going to ask you back on one day. When we go into season 2, you're going to come back on. You're going to come back on, and we're going to talk at
We
length.
get picked up, Joe. We got to get picked up for season 2.
We're going to talk at length about this novel. But as we transition out of our conversation, and I can't thank you enough for being here, and now I feel free to get on the phone with you sometime. But I want to do just a little lightning round to end this episode for the three of us. Kind of a rose and thorns moment from our past week. I'd like just to share a moment that maybe we have failed to be as courageous as we'd like, and a moment in which we've actually succeeded to be as courageous as we'd like. I will start. To be an example, earlier on I was going to do something a little lighter, but because we're talking to you, Joey, I'm going to go do something. Place I keep falling down, place I have been failing in my own courage of late, not just this last week, is I won't wear Mag and David. No, I never have. I've never.
Magen David?
Yeah. I've never.
Yeah, okay.
I've never worn a Jewish star. Star of David. That's not me. Yep. But ever since October 7th of last year, I have both been feeling like I need to stand up for that part of my community, while at the same time, I'm actually afraid. I'm really embarrassed to say this. I'm embarrassed to say it. But in New York, there's been so much emotional violence, group emotional violence, and the threat of even physical violence that I've been reluctant. That's where I have fallen down. Where I have actually succeeded is this podcast. I am really afraid of putting myself out there as myself. I'm an actor in part because I can express myself through a character, express a slice of myself, and then distance myself if someone says, "Oh, David, you're blah, blah, blah." I was like, no, that's just a character. Here I am coming out. I'm a guy who I want to think of myself as a smart person people look up to, as a sensitive person, someone people are going to like. And I'm, that's not always going to happen on this thing. But I feel the need to, as you were saying earlier, in some little way, put myself out there in this moment. So that's me. Stephan, what?
So you spoke to big courage.
You're right. I did.
You're talking about issues. You're talking about the public space. I think it's important. I think it's important when you ask that question, to not necessarily presume that you're going to get an answer about the public space.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I could give you an answer like that. I mean, I could tell you, oh, I didn't show up at this particular rally, but I wasn't going to speak at that rally. I don't want to speak these days. I don't want to be a public speaker. I used to do that, but I don't want to do that. I could tell you I didn't show up at that rally. That's not really a lack of courage. I could tell you a better lack of courage for me.
Has
nothing to do with, well, it does and it doesn't. It's our society. Okay, and it's comical. It's comical. He went to the public library. And I don't often do that, the branch near me. And I went to the public library to get some work done on a computer. And I had my headphones on too. Nobody was anywhere near me. And someone came in and plumped himself right down opposite me. No problem. Great. Big long table. No problem at all. He's gonna work. He's gonna read. Great. All of a sudden, I see him on his phone, and he starts talking on the phone. I figure, okay, so he's gonna talk on the phone for a second. He's sitting back and he's having a regular loud conversation. But I told Lisa all about this. This was like I felt. It's a lack of courage because it's a lack of realizing what I needed to do. I finally asked him, thinking I'll be courageous, and there's nothing courageous about this. I said, would you mind? Would you mind moving somewhere else or whatever? And he pretended like he didn't hear me. I said, would you mind? And he said, excuse me, to whoever he's talking to. And he said, are you being passively aggressive?
No, I'm being expressly aggressive. No, it's
That's what I said. That's exactly what I said. That's exactly what I said. And he said, well, come on with me. And I got up to go with him. And I'm thinking, oh, here we go. I'm 15 again, right?
Rumble.
Or I'm 20. And I saw he was, I thought we're going to go outside, but he takes me up to the desk. Okay. And at the desk, he's complaining about me. It was like a, what do you call it? Like a Seinfeld moment. And I made a mistake. I was so upset. I put my arm around him and said, which of course you don't do. And I said to the librarian, I was sitting at this table all by myself, whatever I said. And it just completely fell apart. And, 10 minutes later, he had moved. They had told him to move. And a librarian who was so terrified came over to me, terrified, and said, did you put your hand on someone?
Oh.
So I came home, I told Lisa, I told my wife, I said, this is what I did. She said, you did what? Now, what does this have to do with courage? That's stupid. I mean, I should have moved. Yeah, he was being complete sure, but I should have moved. And what does it have to do with courage? It has to do with courage because I didn't pay attention to what I know. I wasn't listening to what I know very deeply. I didn't need this. I could have just moved somewhere else. And so I failed. Okay, this is my failure. That's much more important to me, actually, because that's where things fall down in the society.
You're absolutely right. Right. Stephan, what about yourself?
Oh, man, that's an interesting question. You can't ask this question every week because I'll run out of stuff.
I know you very well. No, you're not. No, well, you're a renewing fount. You're gonna be fine.
What's your failure of the week?
In my business, I'm more talent, relations, and manager than lawyer, but I'm on so many phone calls a week. I have to lie, and I don't have the courage. If I tell them the truth, and I want to tell them the truth, it will blow up the whole process and deal. So I have to do Jedi mind tricks. True story. I purposely, and maybe cowardly, do not say anything about a particular deal or my thoughts, even though I know I'm right. And it ends up that I am right. When this falls apart, I have to remain silent. And I don't want to do that, but it's almost like a sacrifice I have to make to try to keep some kind of relationship. And it's difficult. So I stay silent, even though I know the answer.
Gentlemen,
And,
I'm sorry. I think we're going to wrap this up here because...
Wait a minute, I got another part. Why are you fucking with me, Dave? Excuse me.
This is why we're doing this together.
See, Joe, see what he does to me? Did you ever? I got to live with this. So, this is...
You think that wasn't courageous enough? You think that was a... Go ahead.
Gentlemen, we're going to say goodbye at this point. We're going to say adieu.
Thank you, Joey. Thank you, Rabbi Joey.
Thanks, man.